And we're live. All right. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Spring YouTube Live. We are building this season around the book Learning Transformed. Hold on just one second. Mute that. Sorry about that. We're building this season around the book Learning Transformed by Thomas Murray and Eric Scheninger. Thomas Murray is one of the authors of the book, and he will be joining us at our convention in the fall as the keynote speaker. And this is a secret announcement, but we're going to make it public right now. Eric Scheninger is going to be joining us at the 2020 conference at Spooky Nook as well. So we're having the two authors of this book 2 years in a row, and it's going to be fantastic. In fact, Thomas will be joining us next week here on YouTube Live. Tonight's guest with us, though, this gentleman is somebody who came very recommended to me from Matt Trout, our current president. He said, you have to meet Dr. Richard Mextorf at Hamburg School District. He is the most phenomenal superintendent ever. He builds his whole culture and his whole philosophy around wellness, student wellness. He has been in education for 35 years, 12 years as a teacher, and 23 years at various leadership roles. And he focuses on whole child learning with an emphasis on physical, mental, social, and emotional wellness. And we are so happy to have you tonight. Welcome, Dr. Mextorf.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we will get this conversation started right off the bat. In 2015, the Gallup Student Engagement Survey data provided the U.S. a snapshot regarding trends of engagement levels of students in school, like perceptions of school, how cared for the students feel while they're in school. Do you believe these statistics mirror those of your own district? And then what are you doing to ensure student engagement? Because I believe school has changed. We often end up in this industrial age model that school was created for. But you know, students are different today because it's the information age. So how are you dealing with the engagement levels and perceptions of that?
Yeah, I don't think kids have changed. It's been 35 years, and I don't think kids have changed all that much. The things they have access to have changed, but they come to us as young learners, and they're excited, and they want to learn everything. And by the time they get to high school, you know, they're largely doing what needs to be done to get the grade required, or they're disengaged in some level, or they found something else that's more important to them. And I think that's a system issue. It's not a Hamburg issue or any other specific school, but it's really a system. And we bring kids in and we kind of put them in different bins for administrative convenience. This is a Title I kid. This is an emotional support kid. This is a learning support kid. This is an autistic kid. This is an ESL kid. And so they put in these bins and they kind of go through the system. And I think over time, they can become disengaged in the process, especially because, look, I use this example all the time. You have kids, let's say it's first grade, and they have reading groups in first grade. Now they put these colorful names on the reading groups, like the blueberry group and the strawberry group. But if you're in the blueberry group in first grade, you know it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And by third grade, then, well, maybe you haven't been pegged to do Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So now you're in a regular math group. So by third grade, you've been told by the system where you are, and you start to become disengaged. And then we wonder, they're in high school, why they're not motivated. So I think it's a system problem, but I don't think kids really have changed. So that begs us to say, what is our system, and how can we really personalize or tailor a learning experience for every kid? We've got every technological device under the sun, but that's not how to get it done. You got to, and we'll talk about this a little later, you got to unleash teachers to do what they do with kids. And so if we take a look at the system that we put our kids in, the different bins we put them in, no wonder they become disengaged. I don't think really have changed. And I think, so when I went to school many years ago, when we talked about discipline, I think we were really compliance. I'm not sure I really respected all my teachers, but I didn't want to get in trouble. So I complied. I think now I have a much greater awareness of kids be connected to school and really their social and emotional well-being. Look, I used to think, I'm from the old school, I'd say trauma. What trauma? Get back in there, But so there are really three underpinnings, I think, that we can focus on. One is really understanding what trauma is and how it affects all of us, particularly in the learning setting. Secondly, social and emotional development. You know, the kids who haven't had that time in their life where they've been the most important person in the world to somebody, and
Mm-hmm.
haven't had a chance to connect and get that nurturing. They need it somewhere. And if they're used to fending for themselves, what makes us think they're going to come to school and do everything as part of a group? And then thirdly, really early childhood brain development. So those are the, and if we pay attention to those, and then how we can accommodate student needs as they come in, and we focus on that, I think, and that's what we're really working on in Hamburg, is to make sure that we pay attention to those things. And of course, you mentioned the whole child. We can talk more about that, but I think it allows us to help kids maintain or retain as much of that early enthusiasm. What do we want for kids? We want them to be curious and self-directed, and that's how they come to us curious.
Yes, they do.
And, you know, we can help them become self-directed, but it's really taking a look at our system.
So you mentioned social and emotional. I mean, I know from my experience as a teacher, I'm seeing more and more kids coming to school with those social emotional issues that I didn't see 5 years ago. Do you see that? I mean, I see it kind of as a multi-pronged, because I think if it was a magic pill solution, I think we'd all do it, because none of us are in the business of just saying, "Hey, suck it up, Buttercup, get out there." But do you see that as is it related to the devices and things that they have access to now? Because you talked about fending for yourself. Like I walk around stores sometimes and I see parents just staring at their phones. And do you see that? Is it what are your thoughts on causes of that, and what can we do about it? Even in our small pockets of our own classrooms.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing you mentioned about batch processing kids in the industrial model. We kind of group them by their date of manufacture, if you will, and we at what's convenient for us. And so I think back to when I was a kid, and maybe it was different for me, but I think I knew one kid whose parents were divorced. And I'm not knocking people who are divorced, and I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying it's a condition. So you have kids that are jostled back and forth between two households. You introduce new partners, those kinds of things. There's a lot for kids to manage there in that place where they need to feel the most secure. And so the family unit, I don't want to sound trite and say breakdown of the family unit. I mean, life is life, things happen. But you take kids maybe are not as connected to that family unit, where the most important part of that kid's life was their family, and school supported that. So I'm not going back and being nostalgic and thinking we need to go back to what is perceived as the better good old days, but we have to acknowledge that kids come with more of those things they have to experience. Now, not parents spend too much time on their devices and ignoring their kids. I really don't know enough about that to comment, because that really depends on the personal. But if we talk about sort of the global thing, the social and emotional development of kids, I think they come to school having had to fend for themselves for a longer period of time. And so when they're worried about themselves, whatever setting they're in, a daycare setting or whatever it happens to be, and again, I'm not knocking any of that. I'm just saying this is what we get in our schools. This is what you get in your classroom. We have to be aware of that. So we can't suck it up, Buttercup. That's the school that I come from. That's mentioned. So having an awareness of the fact that kids don't have that connection as much. Now we have some kids that the most important part of their life is their family, and we support them. And I call those play school kids. Those are the ones that play school pretty well. And the expectations are set by the parents. But so we've got a large variety, and I don't discount that we have kids who are autistic. I don't discount that we have kids who are abused. So there are issues out there, but relative to social and emotional learning, school has got to be prepared to be a connector for kids. And the key element of that is the adults. In our school district, what I tell everybody, we have a convocation every year. They have to listen to me for an hour. If you get a paycheck, you got to listen to me for an hour.
That's awesome.
And we have two types of people in our organization. We have teachers and we have everyone else. Teachers do the work in the classroom. The rest of us support that work. And we have to and realize that that's very difficult work. I saw a great quote the other day. The best part about teaching is that it matters. The most challenging part about teaching is that it matters every day. And those kids always need you at your best.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to honor that and put teachers in a position where they have the resources, they have the time, and they can really use their insight and creativity to connect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So joining us now, Dr. Mextorf, this is Jessica Piccone-Cook. She's a co-host this season.
Hello.
And she's going to be joining us this evening. Jess, do you want to take the next question on innovation?
Sure. I had to say, following up with that quote that you had shared, and there's a name that'll resonate with a lot of people that are listening to this that knew Tom Cobb, who was a very dear member of our organization and a phenomenal dance educator. But he was very big on saying that every teacher should take a theater class because you are on stage every day, regardless of whether you're not coming into your classroom with a good day or a bad day. And I think that was so true. That was always something that stuck with me because we have a lot that we deal with as educators. But you know what? The kids don't need to see that side of it. They deserve to get the best of us every day. And that's a hard thing to do. So that I love that quote that you had shared.
Thank you.
All right, Todd, because I came in late, I just want to make sure I'm asking.
We're on
culture of innovation.
All right. So talking about culture of innovation, and this is really something that has been brought to the forefront in our organization because of Todd. How can school leaders create a culture of innovation, and how can it then be scaled?
First of all, when you talk about innovation, I think about disruptive. A real leader in that field is Clayton Christensen. And disruptive everywhere but education is seen as a positive thing. Because if you don't you don't get to exist anymore. I think about Blockbuster. I don't know if you all remember. I remember with our kids going to Blockbuster and pulling the video off the shelf or the CD or whatever, DVD, whatever it was. In the old days, it was the video. And if your video wasn't there, you waited to see if somebody would bring it back, have them check in the return bin. And everybody went to Blockbuster. And then all of a sudden, Netflix comes along and says, by the way, we can send those to your house. You don't need to go anywhere. And Block took a hit. And then they said, oh, by the way, we can stream those right to your TV. Anytime you want, any movie you want. And so now we don't have Blockbusters. I think there's one in Alaska. So there's an example of what happens if you don't embrace disruptive innovation. And so in schools, I don't think we have a habit of embracing disruptive innovation, but it all comes down in my mind to what do you believe about your teachers? Do you believe your teachers are bright, innovative, engaged, and want to do something that or not? And if you do believe that, then you have to you got to speak truth to the teachers. If you've been around 15, 20 years, you've heard the jargon, you've seen things come and go. You've had more than one superintendent, probably more than one principal. They all have their new ideas. They're all trying to make a splash, look good to the board. I've been a superintendent 18 years. I know how it goes. And teachers are smart. They say, oh, this too shall pass. And it does. When you superimpose an idea onto an existing system, which is why we talked about the system first, it's going to get absorbed and nothing's going to change. So a culture of innovation, it's really about giving permission. It's creating the culture where people have permission to think for themselves and try new things. And if it doesn't work, okay. But we try something else. But anything that becomes this, I think about Understanding by Design and Charlotte Danielson, and I think about Howard Gardner, and I could go on and on. All of these things that, school districts say, well, now we're all adopting this. Classrooms for the future. We're all going to chase after this money, and we're going to put computers in our schools, and now we have expensive chalkboards and expensive notebooks. But instruction didn't change because it was forced on people. So you've got to plant the seeds. You've got to let it incubate, and it's got to be organic in nature. You cannot say to teachers, we're all going to do this now, because they know better than you why it won't work in their room. And even if it works in another district, you have a different context. So you got to trust your teachers. You got to give permission. It's got to be organic, and you have to get to yes. You have to say not just yes, but yes and. The very first thing I did when I came to Hamburgers, I met with a high school principal, and I said, you need to move from no because, yes and. And it really was remarkable. If you put faith in the teachers, trust their intelligence, trust that they have ideas, and let them run with it and support it, like Deneen Kelly did in Hamburg, built a whole wellness program. That was one meeting. And it was the first half day in October 2015. I'll go to that one. And we started to talk about that. And Deneen was just like, I want to do this. And she ran with it. And now we have this great program. And I didn't have a whole lot to do with what happened other than saying yes, giving resources, and planting the seeds. So that's what I think we have to do with innovation is you got a lot of talent and a lot of intelligence and a lot of people want to do good things for kids. You got to let them. But district vision that everyone's aspiring to move toward. And that's the role of leadership, to articulate that ideal best.
Well, I think figuring out too, what you said that stood out to me was if something doesn't work, that's okay. And it's about figuring out why didn't it work? How do we approach it differently the next time? And I think reflection is so important for teachers. I mean, it's important for everybody in general when you move forward and do things differently to do better the next day. But making sure that we're taking that time. We're teachers. We know how to assess. Like, let's assess why this didn't work. Why did it work? How do we do it better the next time?
And that's valuable assessment time.
Mm-hmm.
Judging the quality of a teacher, and thankfully they're backing off of this with the state evaluation system of evaluating teachers and mixing in test scores and this ungodly formula that really nobody understands. So let's build in feedback loops that matter, and the people who do the work should be putting the feedback loops in place. As long as you know where you're going. I really believe that Deneen embraced what she embraced, because I got there right away and I said, here's our ideal best. That's what a vision is. We're going to create an anytime, anywhere learning environment. We're going to hook kids around their interest and not how it's most easily taught, but how it's best learned, which allows for great flexibility. And we're going to teach the whole child. And those and that'll never change as long as I'm at Hamburg. And they know that. So now they're comfortable. They're not like, okay, what are the 5 goals this year? You know?
So you were talking a little bit about giving permission to try something new, and it's okay if it doesn't work. You know, I think some teachers, I know I've read some blogs and things like that, and I hear teachers talking about failing and failure is okay and failure is imperative, and I certainly understand that and find it important to fail forward is a good way to say it. But what about a teacher who constantly is trying something new and constantly failing? Is that a failing classroom? And then what would you say to an administrator who might be listening, like, to help that teacher? Because, like, it's probably not okay to try things and fail every week, because it might create a failing classroom. So how might you talk them into failing forward?
I guess I would start with, what do we do with kids when they fail constantly? Are we giving the same instruction in the same way and them not being successful? Are we digging in to find out why they're not successful? I think you use the same teachers. Instead of saying, well, that didn't work, you help them build it from the beginning. And if they're failing a lot, if things aren't going well, then there's obviously a problem with the planning. And then you sit with the teacher and you say, how can I help? Not here's what's going on. How can I help? Let's build this together. Let me come in and let's walk through the process. I know it's difficult to do because with your principal, you're playing dodgeball. In my job, I'm playing chess. They're playing dodgeball every day. So I know it's tough to do this, but I'm gonna visit your room every day and we're gonna help you get started with this. What's the first step? So this is where the feedback looping comes in. What's the first step? Did that work or did it not? What do we have to do? And you let them feel free to innovate and to try things. But if it's constantly falling apart, then let's build it together. Let's take a look at this together and let me try and help. And that's where that culture of how can I help is really important, because we get enough judgy stuff from everywhere.
Right.
And so, and then we have this system where in schools, it's not okay for kids to fail. Now, you understand what I'm saying there. You know,
I do.
It's okay to take healthy risks and learn from those risks. And so it should be okay for teachers too. But by the same token, if they're continuously underperforming, just like a kid, you wouldn't say, well, that kid's an F. Kid failed. They have, when I started teaching, I had a colleague who had been there many years. Now, I started teaching in 1984. Okay.
Okay.
And so we're going back. And
I won't tell you what grade I was in then.
I don't want to hear if you were born or not.
I was alive. I think I was in middle school.
Yeah. But I'm older by the day, believe me. But he said to me, dead serious, he said, Every student has the right to fail. We can't take that right away from them. That was the
Yeah.
mindset. And so we're smarter than that. We're more insightful than that. And when they come to high school and we hear that they're not motivated, we talked about the bin system and the sorting for administration. That's how that gets that way. And it's really not a high school problem, but you got it. And so if there's a kid that's failing continuously, we're going to dig in and we're going to study the child and see what we can do to support. Same thing with the teacher. And maybe there's a teacher that is a trusted colleague. You hook them up with a trusted colleague and you let them work together. Maybe you bring in a substitute teacher for a day and you let the two of them work together and go through it step by step. Maybe that's more culture. And as principal, you can say, let me help with this and look at it with a set of. So I challenge.
It was interesting you say that, because I challenged my staff last year. I said, administrators sometimes they spend a lot of time outside the classroom, and it's important. And all of them, I think, believe that it's important to reconnect to the classroom. So I challenged my phys ed staff last year. I said, find an administrator, and even if it's one that you don't know that well, and ask them to plan and teach a lesson with you, not because you're being evaluated, but they can exercise their teaching and planning muscles. And in turn, you can work with them and they can model some teaching practice for you. You can learn from each other. And it's actually, the administrators like that idea. And a couple of them took it upon themselves to do that. And it's worked quite well in terms of connecting them.
And I've been around long enough. I've been out of the classroom now for 23 years. So I'm not kidding myself. There's no way I can go in and do as good a job as a teacher who does it every day. And I know. So, teaching and superintendent are different jobs.
For sure.
I like to think I'm okay at mine. It's sort of like I said, it's playing chess. But teaching has got his own complexities. And so I don't harbor any illusions that I can go in and show. I have some things I know that I can help teachers with. But to think that I can go in and plan a lesson that they can model after 23 years, I know better.
Yeah.
But it would be really cool to go in and say, hey, let's work on this together. Let me feel what it's like.
Right.
And I think it has to be more than, 10 minutes or a period. I think it's got to be a little chunk, because it goes back to the quote. I think, I always say teaching is like, for a teacher, you put that treadmill on high, not on an easy jog. Day one, you're on high. You're on the fastest sprinting. And then when you have service day, the treadmill keeps going and you jump off, and then you have to jump back on and get all the other stuff done. I mean, it's a really, there's a lot going on. And so it's kind of, you're on 100%, and it really can drain you. So it's a different job than what I have. Mine's more of I always say teachers is like a sparkler. The superintendent's like a punk. One burns really brightly and one kind of has a slow burn. I want teachers to have breaks. I want them at it so they can recharge, because I know how difficult it is. And that's what so I don't know how to be a good teacher the way I used to. And maybe I was better than I really was. You know what I mean? But I don't pretend that I can go in and be a model teacher for teachers who do it every day. But I can respect what it is and what they do, how hard it is, and make sure that we create some white spaces in their day. And so cram in services with every minute. I mean, we call them adult learning plans, and we create white spaces in those days so teachers can think and talk and breathe. That's where the good ideas come from, not from sitting with somebody tell you what you need.
Right.
So,
Jess, you want to go next?
Can I ask a question that we didn't record? Because just you talking about your background and everything, what made you want to? It's a safe question, I promise. But when you look at tying your history and your experience into being a teacher, what from your teaching days is something that you treasure the most, that you think of every day as a superintendent and administrator? Like, what's one thing that you really call upon from your experience in your day to day?
How much the kids, and this isn't easy, you're right, this is a softball, how much the kids look up to us. If you're working hard, you cannot fool a kid. If you're mailing it in, they know it, and they won't. If you're working hard, even if they're one of the, and this was before you came in, even if they're one of the blueberries, even if they're one of the ones who aren't the play school kids, they'll know that you're genuine. And they might not do any better in school, but they'll know that you're investing in them. So how much influence as adults, even more so than parents in some situations. And these kids look to us for that guidance. And I think that's a privilege. I really do. We have 2,400 kids in our district. I've had as small as 1,400 and as large as 7,500. I love 2,400 because just this afternoon, I was in the hallway working with a group of kids for 20 minutes because I can do that. And I never cease to appreciate the fact that these kids are there for us to work with. So the way, just the influence that we can have in act and how much they really do respect what we do. And if we're working to earn it, they're going to notice because you can't fool a kid.
So Dr. Mextorf, you talked about culture of yes, and I really, really love that. I believe in that wholeheartedly because, it really builds people up to think that, hey, I have the backing of my upper administration to possibly do this. But we all know from working in schools for a long time that you are dictated by a budget and there's only so much money to go around. So when you have a teacher or an administrator or anyone come to you and say, I have this thing that I want to do and you want to do that culture of yes, and you want to find that pathway to yes, but sometimes the money is just not there, or maybe it's expensive. What are your thoughts on how to get to that pathway to yes when we have expensive initiatives that somebody might want to try?
I show them where we are financially. I say, yes, let's take a look at it. Let me show you what the priorities are. I'll give you, for instance, I met with a group of teachers several weeks ago and I said, I'd really love to get another teacher in your department. You need one. Traveling all over you have 200 kids. But I need you to know that this is one need. I have ESL needs. I have autistic support needs. I have a bunch of different, and I laid them out. I said, here are the needs that we have. There are needs everywhere. And so this goes on as a need, but it's not necessarily at the top because I have to consider everything. And so when I get multiple needs, I had a group of teachers that had a $16,000 budget request. And I said, sure, because it really was enable kids to work from anywhere. Okay. To do their schoolwork from anywhere if we spent this money. And then the came back and they wanted $30,000 for chairs, posture chairs. And I said, well, that's not quite frankly a high enough priority because I need that money elsewhere. And I showed here's where we're going to spend the money. We're in active learning spaces. So rather than get a whole bunch of these posture chairs, I might say to them, well, if you're going to work with a small group, how about we get you a half dozen for each area? See what I mean? But be really open and say, here's what the priorities are. Here's the money that we have. If there's a way, maybe they'll come back and say, well, you know what? This is a higher priority for us than the other budget item we put in. You know what I mean? But you got to be open about it. I mean, the budget's not a secret. It's a public document.
Right.
So just open up. Say, here are all the priorities. Here's what I'm wrestling with.
Right.
And if we come up with it, and that's why I'm not just saying yes. So maybe it needs to wait a year. So this is a yes, but not this year. But the best that I can come up with is it'll be on the list next year, and we won't forget it. And you're just being honest with people. Yeah.
So pushing it down the line, that's a good. I like that. That's a good idea. So, Jess, you want to take the final topic before we do the Twitter advice?
Yeah. I know the term ROI, like return on investment, is very synonymous with the business world. But when it comes to education and teaching, how do you measure the return on investment for initiatives or programs that you're spending with your teachers? How are you able to assess and see that they're working, that they need tweaked?
I think measure the right things. So we've so focused on the things that are easiest to measure. What do you always hear, especially at the high school? Well, we measure attendance, we measure discipline, we measure graduation rates, we measure test scores, and how many kids take AP classes, and all those. They're really easy to measure, but do they really, really matter? Because let's say discipline, those things, they're all symptoms of what's going on in your school. So I think figuring out what the right things are to measure. So, for instance, we have a situation. I'll give you, for instance, we have a situation in our high school where it's typical for high school juniors or seniors in their English class. They'll all read a book together, and then they'll all do a report. They'll write a paper. and then they'll do a revision, get a grade, and throw it away. And so the teacher said, and of course, this was a seed we planted 2 years ago, which sprouted just this year. And it's wonderful when it's their idea. That's what you want. So we have a teacher who's doing a great job. She said, I'm going to create a list of books, all of which are acceptable for these kids. And I'm going to let them choose which book they want to read. And then they self-selected into work groups. And here's when I knew we were making progress. She said, if I only have one kid from the class choose a particular book, it's no problem because I can hook them up asynchronously in Google Docs to work with a group from another class. Now I know that we're making connections about boundaryless learning, right? And so kids now got to choose the book. It's not that they're going to write the same paper, revise it once, turn it in, get a grade, and throw it away, because they also now get to choose how they want to represent their understanding of the book. And the last piece was, because they're paperbacks, we said, instead of saying to the kid, here's the book, the school owns it. If you damage it, you're going to owe us money, and we're going to hold your report card if you don't pay us. That's the mess. That's the whole system thing I'm talking about. We said, by the way, the books that we just got you, and this is like the Hildebrand book, Unbroken, some really cool books, we said, by the way, this is your book. We're giving you this book. And the old adage, well, the kids are going to mistreat it. They're going to mistreat it if it's not theirs. These books are in immaculate condition. And so how are we measuring that? Going around to every group of kids and saying, what do you think of this? So much there. And of course, the teacher does a great job with creating not a study guide, but like a little template. Because you can't just tell high school kids, go talk about a book. Maybe you can adults. Maybe. But kids, you got to have a little, but he did a great job. So now the kids own it. They literally own that book. Business manager's head didn't explode. They're disposables, basically, right? So we got that set up for them. Own the book. They're choosing their work groups. They're choosing how they represent their understanding. So I just walked in one day and said, how's it going? And they are so much more engaged. And so how we'll measure that is, we'll take a look at the term paper or the book report paper that they had to do from other years. And then we'll take a look at their work samples from the video projects they do, the movie trailers, the game shows they come up with, the contests, the scavenger hunts, those kind of things where they say, we're going to show you what we know. They own it. So it really comes down to who owns the learning. And if that can be your one guiding question for anything that you measure, you notice attendance, we don't ask who owns the learning. That's a symptom. If kids aren't coming to school, it's because they're not engaged. They're not engaged because we have to design instruction to engage them. So let's measure the right things, and let's figure out the right way to measure it. And that's a feedback loop. So in that situation, we're finding out from kids, number one, how well they like it, but number two, we're going to take a look at their work samples. And guess what? When that work sample gets done, it can be digitized and posted forever. And it can put in a digital portfolio. Now kids have something of their own that they're proud of, and that's a heck of a lot better than write a paper, revise it, turn it in, get a grade, throw it away. So there's a good example of that.
That's awesome.
And that's a real world too. I mean, that's what I always talk about with my kids. I teach a leadership class to high school kids, and I often ask them, I'm like, well, do you know why you're in biology? Do you know why you're taking algebra? And by and large, the kids, besides a grade, can't tell me in many cases. And I've said that, I've shared that with some of the staff, just, like, are we teaching them why? So I love that. I love hearing that you're really connecting those dots.
Well, it connects into the bigger picture.
I want to mention one other thing. You talked about relevance. I actually have a series of essays, and they're all posted on our website under documents. You'll find them on they're easy to find. But one of them is called, When Are We Ever Going to Use This?
Yeah.
Relevance. And then the other one's called Habits of Mind. And that is, why do we teach science? Because we want kids to understand inquiry and how to do structured inquiry.
Right.
Even if you know science again, you're going to need inquiry in your life.
Right.
You're going to need conceptual and abstract thinking. You may never do algebra again, but you're going to need conceptual and abstract thinking in your world. So there are some essays that go on that are much more detailed that address that are on our website.
Yeah.
I'd love to check that out.
That's phenomenal. Definitely want to check that out. Well, Dr. Mextorf, this has been such a phenomenal night. I mean, my gosh, I could spend 2 hours just talking to you and going through all of this stuff with you and learning from you. And I think I might email you and try to come up and visit Hamburg sometime and just see how you do it up there in person. But so thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we want to close this with the little segment we call it Twitter advice. So we're going to run down 5 points, and in 280 characters or so, just a quick and easy idea on piece of advice that you can give to young teachers. I always think like we need to pay it forward to our next generation of teachers coming in, and I always ask our guests to do this. This kind of came from an idea. One of my favorite shows from the 90s was a show called Inside the Actors Studio, and I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, but
sure. James Lipton.
But Robin Williams was on it. He was one of my favorites. And James Lipton always asked 10 questions at the end that included your favorite swear word and your favorite noise. Well, we won't ask you your favorite swear word.
That is not a part of the segment.
Yeah, but I don't want them on the air.
Yeah, no, we'll find out what that is off the air. But for now, so Jess and I will just alternate. So I'll start since I started it off. But what's one thing that any people need to do to become great teachers or leaders?
Learn.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah, you've got to always be learning, and you've got to be reflective. You have to understand that it's not about it's about finding the best decision, and it doesn't matter what. And it often comes from throwing things out. And we had our human resource director, who's not part of our Act 93. We were wrestling with an issue, and 2 hours later, she comes to my office. She goes, "Why don't we just do this?" And it was a brilliant solution. And it doesn't matter who came up with it, because we came up with it. It's about always learning, always accepting other points of view, and trying to get to the right answer. Not that.
What is the most important learning for kids in school?
This is not because I'm on your program.
You say that to all the new hosts.
First of all, as a learner, we talked about this earlier, they need to retain their curiosity, be curious and self-directed. So I think as a learner, that's a big thing. They're not going to have a job for 35 years in the same place. So they always have to be learning and self-directed. But I think the most important thing to navigate life is to be well. I think you got to be mental health, emotional health, physical health, and you have to know social health, like empathy and perspective taking, and understanding that there's people in the world that have different points of view and so forth, but really, really trying to understand other people. So I would say to navigate a good life, I think you got to be well, and you cannot ignore one of those, or they all suffer.
Amen. Love that answer.
So I don't know if you're on Twitter or you follow too many on Twitter, but your favorite educators that we would follow, look up, and look at their philosophies.
I would think, if I could give you one, there's a team. Tony Wagner is who's blowing up the system. They did a great movie called Most Likely to Succeed. They have Ted Dintersmith wrote with him what schools could be, and I think Chow, who's now at University of Oregon, and he writes about how we shouldn't try and be like China. I mean, they're trying to be like us. They're making our iPhones, but they're not inventing our iPhones. And he has a number of great books that really help us think differently about really remaking the system to meet our current reality.
I loved What School Could Be. I read it this summer. It was a phenomenal read. So yeah, love that one. Thank you.
What is the best advice that you've ever gotten?
I've been so blessed to have mentors along the way. I would say be grateful. Be grateful that what we do, it's difficult, and some days are better than others. But I think the best advice is just be grateful for where you are, man, and what the opportunity that we have. Because when it's all said and done, and you pass it on to somebody else, you want to say, man, I did my best work. I made the most of this wonderful way to spend a career. So I'd say.
All right. So final question of the night. at some point we will all walk out of the office or our gymnasiums or our classrooms for the final time in our career and wrap it up. What would you like the epitaph on your office door to say?
We did this together.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I want to come work in your school district.
Me too. I shouldn't say that much. Some of my colleagues might be watching. It's a great place. I love what I do, but that's awesome. So, well, Dr. Mextorf, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on tonight and sharing what you know about education with our listeners, and we're so appreciative. If you don't know this, folks, Dr. Mextorf is going to be joining us at Spooky Nook in the fall as part of our administrator track, telling us, I think it's going to be a wellness and whole child based, and he's going to talk about how he does things up at Hamburg and he and his team. So we are so looking forward to that. And on behalf of Jessica, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure. My pleasure.